live long and prosper. So in this video series, I'm going to be talking through the social justice elements of every episode of the original series of Star Trek. The thing that inspired this project was actually a Fox News article which argued that Star Trek has in some way betrayed its traditional commitment to sort of political neutrality or middle ground by embracing progressive politics. In this series, we're going to see that Star Trek has always embraced progressive politics, and it's always been aspirational for social justice in various senses. I am taking a broad perspective on social justice here, so that may include multiple different types of social justice, whether that's racial, whether that's economic, whether that's religious, whether that's abilities, gender and sexuality, anything broadly considered. I will go through every episode. Some of the episodes I will interview fellow Trekkies and talk with them about it. And then below, in the descriptions, I will give you additional information about the episodes, particularly their original air date, who wrote the screenplay, and who directed that episode. I also want to dedicate this series to my dad, Michael Allen Zapkin. He was an OG Trekkie from back in the day, and it was watching the original series with him that I came to love Star Trek. In this video, we're going to talk about the episode The Naked Time. There's a couple of smaller social justice issues in this episode, but rewatching it post 2020, there's one really major issue that probably would jump out at anyone immediately. And that is the public health crisis. So, particularly in the post-COVID-19 period, this is a really significant episode. And it's significant because one of the big things that's dramatized here is the problematic impact that a single person's irresponsible actions can have on the collective. Because in this episode, we start with Spock and Joe. I forget what Joe's last name is. It doesn't matter. He dies pretty quickly. Anyway, Spock and Joe have beamed down to this ice planet where the entire scientific research team that was supposed to be there is now dead. And they're dead in these somewhat bizarre ways. Like, just frozen at their posts, one guy in a shower, taking a shower fully clothed, etc., etc. Power just turned off to the station, etc., etc. They come down in hazmat suits. Orange, got the face shields, all that stuff. They are hazmated up. They are ready to not be infected with some crazy fucking space disease. But Joe is like, even though we're hazmated up and these people have died in this like crazy unexplained way, I'm gonna take my glove off, stick it under my mask, touch my face, touch some other stuff around without actually putting my glove back on, then touch my face again, and then I'll put my glove back on. Now, it is worth noting that Spock doesn't tell Joe we mustn't allow ourselves to be exposed to anything until after Spock gets back and they're about to transport up. But it does seem like if you're in fucking hazmat suits, maybe you should make that assumption, Joe. So anyway, Joe gets infected with this crazy fucking space disease where water has somehow chemically transitioned into alcohol. And so Joe is the first person infected, and Joe basically carries this disease onto the ship. Essentially, because this disease turns water into alcohol, it impacts people's, effectively, blood alcohol level. And so they become kind of drunk. And this brings out their inner personalities. So Joe, who, according to Spock, has always had a high capacity for self-doubt, even though it's not really clear why that information would be in their record tapes, he gets all, anxious about, humans weren't meant to be in space, we weren't meant to fly, I'm gonna stab myself with a butter knife, which is what he does. And then it's probably the least cool death in all of Star Trek. He stabs himself with a butter knife, and then is basically just I don't want to live. And so, from what should be a superficial wound for the medicine of Star Trek, he dies. He's just done. Because he didn't want to. He didn't want to live, according to McCoy. But, before he dies, he passes on this crazy space disease to a bunch of other people. First, Mr. Sulu and Kevin Riley. And the disease is passed on through sweat, through perspiration. So basically, everybody who has any amount of sweat on them, which is, pretty normal, even if it's not a large amount of sweat, it's pretty normal to be sweating. And so anybody who touches anybody basically gets this disease. And everybody just starts acting crazy. Sulu decides that he's D'Artagnan and just starts chasing people around with a fencing foil with the little safety tip taken off of it. Kevin Riley tries to take over the ship and proclaims himself captain and announces that there's going to be a dance and all the female crew need to wear their hair loose around their shoulders. And he starts singing old Irish songs over the intercom, etc., etc. Now, while all of this crazy shit is happening, the Enterprise is in tight orbit over this planet that's breaking up because they need scientific observations of the planet and how it comes apart. So, the planet's gravity fluctuations mean that everybody pretty much needs to be alert and at their posts and ready to go. Ready to, let's pull the ship away from the increasing gravity as this planet collapses in on itself and becomes more dense. So the fact that everybody's basically drunk and just running around doing whatever they want is a huge problem that's going to destroy the entire ship. And actually, when Kevin Riley takes over the engineering section, in a bit that doesn't really make any sense, actually. According to Scotty, Riley goes into the engineering section and says, hey, the captain needs to see everybody in engineering on the bridge right now, and they all are like, okay, that checks out. Even though we're legitimately supposed to be here manning the engines, everybody is going to leave. At which point Riley seals himself in, takes over the ship, shuts down the engines, etc., etc. So, basically, because Joe on this planet was like, I'm gonna break the hazmat safety procedures by taking my glove off, touching stuff, and then touching my face. It actually doesn't seem to matter that he touched his face. Just having the alcohol, water, space disease on his hand was sufficient. But because he was like, I'm going to break this protocol, basically the entire ship was threatened. And so in this, we have... So COVID-19 occurred. It happened. It developed. It spread, etc., etc. It would be very difficult to completely contain. But in countries like the US, where I live, the pandemic was made significantly worse by people asserting their individual right to do whatever they wanted, namely refusing to wear masks, refusing to get vaccinated, etc., etc. And so those personal choices negatively impacted the entire country, and arguably the entire world, because of the role that the outsized role that the US plays in world affairs. So we have that sort of storyline, that sort of social justice storyline here, with Joe breaking these procedures and bringing this disease back on board, where it spreads faster than it can be contained. So there's that element of personal responsibility, and when the failure of that individual to behave responsibly has a detrimental impact on everyone else. Now, the other, I think, relatively not huge, but the other social justice issue that does come up here is, once again, the treatment of women and perspectives on gender equity. And we see this largely from Kevin Riley, as he gets drunk with this space drunk plague. When he's initially relieved of his duty as navigator, Kirk calls Uhura to come over and take the station, and Riley is like, "That's what I like. Let the women work. Women's suffrage." And then he goes off, he takes over engineering, and one of his orders as Captain Riley is that the women are going to wear their hair loose. So, I mean, let's be clear here. Star Trek is presenting 1966's imagination of what a society without gender bias and gender inequality would look like. And that is distinctly not all that equal necessarily. But it is interesting that even in the ostensibly gender equitable society of the Star Trek future, Riley, sorry, I keep calling him O'Reilly, but it's not, it's just Riley. Riley, in his sort of drunken space plague madness, is still invested in controlling the actions of women. So that's a very interesting bit. But again, I think the big thing with The Naked Time is the challenges of public health management, particularly when you have people who are acting irresponsibly.